We're gonna build a train so big, it can't be stopped.
From the executive producers of Power.
We got enemies eyeing us, cops clocking us.
Comes the new season of Power Book 4, Force.
Tommy Egan is the linchpin to bringing down all of these gangs.
Egan's too dangerous to be left alive.
Power Book 4, Force.
Game over.
Premieres Friday, September 1st, only on Stars and the Stars app.
I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Hey folks, a quick note. Check out our new Press Box Access channel on YouTube. You'll see a wide variety of clips from interviews such as Dave Kindred comparing Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus, or Peter King recalling his early days of covering Bill Parcells and Lawrence Taylor. You can also listen to entire episodes on the YouTube channel. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button. Hey, it's free, and I might buy you a beer. Okay, let's roll this episode. I used to run into Geoff Calkins on the road a lot back in my days as a sports writer. We'd be at the same events with a lot of the same writers sent by other newspapers. It was a traveling circus of misfit toys. Geoff knows that road well after 30 years, most of those spent as the voice of Memphis, where a few times he's been honored by the APSE as best sports columnist in the country. But the road Geoff took to get to that road, well, that was a little different, at least among most other ink-stained wretches. We're going to talk about that path and hear some other stories from his years behind the keyboard. Hey, Geoff, come on into the tavern. Welcome.
Well, it's good to be here, Todd, and nice to see you again.
You recently moved from sports to general news column for the Daily Memphian. I'm just curious, all those years, 30 years yourself of doing sports, why the switch into news? I know you're still doing a sports radio show, but why write about other things right now?
Yeah, I mean, I still do the radio show from 9 to 11, but really what happened is really two things. One is, as you know, it's a grind. Like, being a sports writer, being a columnist in a city like Memphis, when Ja Morant, wakes up one morning you wake up one morning and Ja has a gun on Instagram, there goes your Saturday. When he does it again, there goes another Saturday. Grizzlies games, Tiger. There's a lot of games, and it felt like, honestly, like I was doing it the same thing I'd done for 30 years, but because access had changed, the world had changed, I was doing it less well. Honestly. But then the other real reason is that it has been a hell of a year in Memphis for a couple of reasons. Then there were a couple of really signature tragedies. One is a woman named Eliza Fletcher was abducted jogging and murdered, and that became a sort of symbol of a crime crisis in the city. And the second was that Tyree Nichols was killed by Memphis police and murdered, really, by Memphis police. And I remember covering sports, and there's other times when you wonder whether you're writing about the right thing. But I was at a Grizzlies game during this period, and I just thought, you know what? As much as I care about Memphis sports, I care about the city more. And if I could write and contribute anything to the issues that are sort of roiling Memphis right now, that I'd like to take a shot at doing that.
Well, I really applaud you for the move. I mean, and you're such a part of the community. You've been there, 27 years? So, people do know you, and they have learned to trust you, and maybe they don't agree with you, but they know where you're coming from. They know who you are. And that says a lot about the community and yourself and that type of relationship. And you don't necessarily have to be at the 2008 NCAA Men's Basketball Championship game. We've talked deadline with some writers.
Yeah.
Can you put us in that place? Memphis is winning, I think, by 9 or 11. 11 with 2 minutes to go. Yeah, they're up by 11. You've got a column due because you're the Memphis guy. What the hell was it like for you on deadline when all of a sudden Kansas comes scrambling back and Mario Chalmers hits a 3 at the top of the key to force overtime?
It's gutting, not because it's Memphis losing. It's because what happens is that I mean, I was never great on deadline. Some people are wonders on deadline. And I was never great on game columns on deadline. It just, I would, the old Red Smith line, open up a vein and bleed. Like, and that's sort of what I was like. And so, but you're working on 2 columns. Like you really, I think the deadline was 10 minutes after, and on the one, it's Memphis finally wins a championship after all these years of Larry Finch and that team in 72, 73, losing to Bill Walton, and then the Dana Kirk team that went to the Final Four. And now here finally with John Calipari and Derrick Rose and Chris Douglas Roberts, they're going to win a championship for a city that really had never had a championship of any sort. So you're trying to capture that in one file. And then you have this crushing loss, whatever it is, you're in the other file. And yes, you're putting in live stuff that's happening along the way, but you're really building 2 separate columns. And with about 3 minutes left, you realize Memphis is going to win. So you abandon the lose column and you just focus on writing the civic celebration column. And then Will Chalmers hits that shot and you just, it curse. It's impossible because there's no way you can, I can't capture this in 7 minutes or 13 or whatever. I don't remember how many it was. I actually did. I said, at that point I called and I said, you got to give me an extra 10 mints or something here.
Did they give it to you?
Yeah, I got an extra 10 minutes. It was a big event, but it was, oh God, what an awful, it was cliche in the end.
But it would survive in advance, even for the writers.
It was just absolute hell. It was absolute hell. There's just no other way to describe it. And even now, when something happens in any big game and I'm not there, that's that dramatic, you just feel for the people in the press box.
Oh, yeah, that's a natural reaction.
I've
been out of the business for 6 years, and if I am watching a game late at night and something does happen, my first thought is those poor bastards typing away.
Exactly right. It's those poor bastards. That's just true.
Well, you know what, Geoff? On that crazy night when you were sitting there bleeding on the keyboard, you were doing exactly what you wanted to do as a child. And I want to go back to your love of writing, and I want to take you back to, you're in the 3rd grade, and I don't think a lot of people know about this, but at the time as a child, you had leukemia. And you're in bed at the Buffalo Children's Hospital, and your mother would bring something to your room every day. What did she bring?
Yeah, she brought a typewriter. And it's really...
an old manual typewriter.
She'd haul in a typewriter. And I would dictate stories, and she would type them up. So I was diagnosed in the late 60s with childhood leukemia at a time when it was a death sentence. Like right now, 95%. It's the miracle. Like the cancer miracle is childhood leukemia, which went from being everybody died to now pretty much everybody lives. It's really one of the incredible advances. But that hadn't happened yet. And so when I was diagnosed, I had shingles. I was in 3rd grade and I had shingles, and that's why does he have shingles? And then my parents were doctors, and they immediately felt my spleen. My spleen was big, and so I go into the hospital. And later on, I had my mom on the radio show. We didn't talk about any of this much, but now years later, I said, "What was it like when I was diagnosed?" And she said, "I thought it would be easier if you'd been hit by a truck, because the end was going to be the end." But my dad found this doctor my dad was in academic medicine, and he knew a doctor in New York who was starting on a new protocol, and I happened to get lucky enough to be included in the new protocol. And so right now you see kids who are leukemia survivors from the first class of them, and they're basically my age. They're in their 60s, their young 60s or late 50s.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, I'd lie in bed, and Mom was like, she'd come in and I'd dictate stories, and then we'd send it back to the 3rd grade class, and then everyone in that class would have to write me a story. I was the kid with cancer in the class, and so I'd get a story from everyone. whatever. But I really, ever since then, I thought of myself as a writer. Like it was my mom typing those stories as I dictated them to her that made me think, I like words and I like telling stories. And I lost my way along the way a little bit, but I got back to it. And I can't imagine having done anything else. I really can't.
It's just a poignant image of your mother typing away as you dictate a story. And I'm always fascinated by where did a writer first fall in love with the idea of writing and that.
Where'd you? Did you know in elementary school you were a writer?
I do remember having a fifth grade teacher or something give me a lot of positive feedback. And then I would play this APBA baseball dice game, and I would write game summaries of what happened when my brothers and I or our friends, we played this baseball game, and I would keep a notebook and just write. And so I figure, well, that's probably where it all started.
That's
for
where
you,
it started, yeah.
A couple years later, when your leukemia is in remission, you suddenly said, I want to be a sports columnist, You're like in the fifth grade, and I want to do that someday.
Well, the columnist in Buffalo was Larry Felser. He was the columnist for the Buffalo News. Back then we had the Courier Express and the Buffalo News, but the columnist was Larry Felser. I never understood why they also ran this guy at the time. I was in elementary school or what. They used to run Red Smith's columns too, and I'm like,
oh yeah, indicated out of New York, the great Red Smith.
Yeah, I was like, he never writes about the Bills or the Sabres. Why do I care what this Red Smith guy said? I mean, that's what, I wasn't interested in poetry at the time.
This Red Smith guy.
Yeah. So I wanted, I went to when O.J. Simpson broke the record, the rushing 2,000 yards, 72-73 season, he broke it against the Jets in New York.
Yeah, at Shea Stadium.
But the previous game was a blizzard in Buffalo, and I was at that game with my dad. And yeah, I just loved the sports. I loved reading the sports pages, and if I misbehaved, it was, no sports page for a week. That was what it was like. It was like no television. It was no sports page for a week.
Right.
And so if you'd asked me when I was 12 what I wanted to do, it was absolutely to be a sports writer.
Okay, well, you became one, but you mentioned you took a detour. You go to Harvard and you study history, and you're working for the school paper, and you've got a couple internships. You work for Time Life in the summer. You're at Miami Herald.
And then what happens is I applied to Harvard Law School just to see if I'd get in. I didn't apply to 15 law schools, and I got in. And I don't know if they still say it, but what back then they would say is you can do anything with a law degree. That was it. You can do anything with a law degree. And how do you turn down Harvard Law School? So I said, well, I'll go to Harvard Law School.
I mean, talk about polar opposites, sports writing and law. First of all, you're at Harvard Law. I'm at Kentucky.
Right.
You're majoring in law. Right. I'm majoring in beer. I'm going to be a sports writer. You're going to go solve the world's problems as an attorney. And you became one for a firm in Washington, D.C. I believe it was Hogan and Hartson. And you had a colleague, this guy named John Roberts, Supreme Court Chief Justice. You're making money. You're making billable hours. And then at age 30, I think, 31, 1991, what the hell were you thinking?
Well, first, John Roberts was a colleague, but he was let's be honest, John Roberts was a partner at the law firm where I worked. And I was an associate. I don't even know, he was vaguely aware of my name. But it was interesting. There was one of my friends was a Supreme Court clerk, because I had clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals. And so he worked for Antonin Scalia. And so there was one day he said, hey, we're going jogging today. You want to come jogging with me and the justice? And so I went jogging with Antonin Scalia. It was the quote unquote heady world of law. And I hated it. I just hated it. Hated it in a way that, how when you're writing papers in college, you're doing, and you have to will yourself through it hour by hour. All right, let's go work for 4 hours on this. That's how it felt. It was awful. I had the most fun. And honestly, it wasn't just like, oh, I just decided to do something else. I don't know what an emotional breakdown is, but I was drinking too much. I was becoming a profound hypochondriac. I was sort of falling apart in my 20s.
Actually, you sound like a sports writer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I felt like I'd done everything right, and I was miserably unhappy. And so I took a job in Anniston.
So, Geoff, you moved on to your first big boy job when you went down to the Sun-Sentinel in Florida Fort Lauderdale, to cover Major League Baseball. And that's not an easy beat. What was it like for a guy who was, you're in your early 30s, but you're kind of young to the job of sports writing? What was it like to jump into Major League Baseball and the challenges that you faced with that?
It was really hard, honestly, and I wasn't very good at it. Fred Turner was the sports editor there, and he would take chances on people, and he took a massive chance on me because I'd only worked in the business for a year and a half, 2 years. Anniston was an afternoon paper, so I really wasn't writing deadline stuff. And baseball, as you point out, is a hellacious beat. And I was lucky that Gordon Eads was the beat writer. Like Gordon Eads had done the first year of the Marlins, and he wanted to be the national writer and have someone, do most of the games. That was the idea. And so I came in as the beat writer. And so Gordon was just a massive help. He's a unbelievably gifted writer, reporter, just the five-tool guy. Like, he's unbelievable. So he was a huge help. But it was also at a time when, like, Levitard was at the Miami Herald, Pedro Gomez was at the Miami Herald, the Palm Beach Post, Jeff Miller, who's really good, was at the Palm Beach Post. Evan Grant, who covers Dallas now, he covers the Rangers, I think. Like, the beat, you'd wake up every day, and this is back when you would wake up to figure out what was in the competition. It wouldn't be online because there was no online. And honestly, baseball players are tough, and baseball writers are tough. Like, I covered hockey down there a little bit, and everyone could have been nicer. Baseball, like, you feel like baseball, even in the baseball writing fraternity, they're sizing you up. And if you don't know the AA shortstop is for, what it felt like to me anyway. And
was
maybe
that
I was
good
just
for you though at that point?
I don't remember it with great joy. I do not remember being a baseball writer with great joy. The best part was, the road trips where you get to unpack. That's nice. Being in Denver for 3 or 4 days, in San Francisco for 3 or 4 days, getting to the ballpark. Randy Latchman was the manager. He was really nice to me and patient, and because it was clear, I'll be honest, it was clear to me anyway that I was in over my head covering baseball. And so was it good for me? It was good for me. I got faster on deadline. I learned something about reporting. I learned a lot just watching how Gordon would interact with the players.
In what ways? Just the way he had conversations with them?
Yeah, just the way he had conversations. He'd walk up and he'd just have conversations with them. And then he'd pull out his notebook, 5 minutes into the conversation and write something down. And this is basic stuff, but he wasn't just walking up to someone and beginning the interview now. He was shooting the shit with them. Like, he was great at it. And so to see all that was a trial by fire.
But do you think those lessons you learned as a beat reporter for a couple years on a really tough beat, do you think they helped when you then went on to become a columnist?
Oh, yeah. I honestly think, truthfully, I think it would have been better. I would have been better served to be a beat writer longer. Like, I think those skills are absolutely critical. And because I didn't start really being a journalist till I was 31 is when I finished journalism school before I went down to Anniston. And I was in a hurry then to become a columnist at that point because I was freaking 31, I didn't. And so I would have been better served had I worked a beat for 4 years, right? Or 5. I really think I would have been better served. I was somewhat over my head when I was still in over my head when I got to Memphis. I'd been a sports writer at that point for 4 years when I got to be the columnist in Memphis.
Yeah, you show up in Memphis in 1996. Well, Memphis has changed so much as a sports city since the time you arrived to where it is now. You've been able to document that. You wrote that in your book, After the Jump, your collection of the columns over the 20-year period where the city just exploded on the sports scene, right?
It's been fun. But since I've been here, we've had, Calipari and that era in Memphis football. You've had Memphis basketball. Memphis football got to be at least briefly relevant going to the Cotton Bowl and Justin Fuente and Mike Norvell and that era. We had the Tyson Lewis fight, which was absolutely wild and a lot of fun to cover. And then, there was the whole fight about whether to bring the Grizzlies here. And, are the Grizzlies going to work? And then everything around the Grizzlies and the Zach Randolph Grizzlies. We had Jerry West came to town briefly.
Yeah, think about
Allen
that.
Iverson,
the logo in town, right?
Allen Iverson even more briefly, and now Ja. So it's been we had a year with the Titans, which was its own fiasco in town. So it's been there's been no shortage of things to cover. Plus, of course, when I first moved here, at that point, as you know, when you were in Cincinnati and Columbus, like Columbus covered the Olympics, right? You covered the Olympics for Columbus.
Right.
That's unheard of now. I bet Columbus does it. They probably send back then they sent multiple people to the Olympics. Here, I went to 8 Olympics as the columnist in Memphis. I covered a lot of wonderfully fun things, across the world. But then what I've really liked being more than anything is being, I like it when people come up to me in the grocery store and say, I read your column or I hate your column.
Yeah, think about the things you got to experience, like you just mentioned, traveling the world, all these big events, and being the voice, right?
That's been the part.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about some more things about Memphis. You mentioned the Grizzlies. When they came in as an NBA franchise in Memphis in 2001, they came in from Vancouver, things really changed. And you mentioned a particular player I wanted to ask you about, and that's Zach Randolph. I think you have said that the biggest mistake you ever made was you wrote a column saying that they should not trade for him. And he comes in and he carries the team to 7 straight playoffs. There's believe Memphis towels waving. When you think about that now, looking back, if that was a mistake, what were you wrong about in the moment, and how do you look at it now?
Well, Zebo had a reputation as a bad guy, honestly. At that point, he had gone from Portland, he played for the Knicks, and he played for the Clippers. And in Portland in particular, he had the reputation as a bad guy. And I talked to people in Portland, and they said he was a bad guy. And so for a franchise in Memphis that really had never had any success of any, they'd been to the playoffs. They went to the playoffs 3 straight years with Pau Gasol, but had never won a game once they got to the playoffs. And so you have this young team, and why bring in a guy who's, has this and the truth of the matter is, so I wrote a column just saying, don't do it. Like don't do it. It's ridiculous. This is stupid. He's a bad guy. And you can just look at his rap sheet. He had an extensive rap sheet as well. But I remember Tony Baroni, who was assistant GM at the time, he took me aside and he said, Geoff, you're wrong about this. Like what Zebo is he's a follower, and he's going to be fine. And he came here and he was great. I mean, Zebo was he was fun to cover. He led that team to its first playoff win and his first playoff series win over Tim Duncan and the Spurs. And it's not like the incidents went away. Like there were some incidents when he was here where evidently a weed dealer was beaten up by a pool cue at his house or something. Like, I mean, there was. It's not like it all went away.
Right.
And who knows if in the era of cell phones, if we would have seen more about what Zebo was up to, but really became a beloved member of the community who would, he's just a natural fit in Memphis. This is a tough town and he's a tough guy. And so it was a fit right from the beginning.
How did he react to you when he comes to town and you're saying, don't trade for this guy? How did he react to you, and what kind of working relationship were you able to build with him?
He was fine. Zebo never, I don't know that Zebo read the stuff, honestly. Zebo never struck me as a guy who read the stuff. The guy I once had not an issue with, I love Tony Allen. I wrote a column. Marc Gasol got hurt one year. And I quoted Tony. And Tony, the quote was, without Mark, we're a makeshift team. That was the quote that went in the column.
Mm-hmm.
And the pullout, so the editors had a pullout quote.
Look out.
And they typed it in rather than copying it. So in the column, it said makeshift team. The pullout quote said literally giant pullout quote, without Marc Gasol, we're a make-shit team. Tony Allen. And they explained to him that the editors did it,
Makeshift team. I love it.
He held a grudge for about 6 months. Zebo never held a grudge. And honestly, it's one of the, like, I don't want to be the guy who's bemoaning how things have changed, but like that group, Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, Tony, they'd ask about my kids. You know, they knew the names of my kids. Like that's how it was.
And you could agree to disagree or maybe battle over something for a couple of days. And then you kind of figured out how, okay, we're kind of in this game together. We're going to somehow, make this
work. And now because there's no relationship, it's very different.
Hey, before we leave the Grizzlies, I want to ask you about one particular coach, and that's the great Hubie Brown.
Oh.
Now, Hubie Brown in 2002, at age 69, was hired to coach the Grizzlies. He lasted 2 full seasons and a dozen games in 2004. ESPN just extended his deal for its 20th year at age 89. He's in his 50th year associated with the NBA. What was it like to be around Hubie Brown on a pretty much daily basis for a couple of years?
It was a gift. And I don't think anyone expected it to be. Like, it was a weird ass hire. Like, they just hired Jerry West, and Jerry West comes in, team gets off to a bad start, fire the coach. Who are they going to hire? And you hear Hubie Brown, who's been out of it for 10 years, and the last job he had, it was sort of, Hubie, stubborn, irascible, getting into it with players, couldn't adapt to the new age of the NBA. Like, that was sort of when he was fired the last time. He didn't fit in the modern NBA. And here's 10 years later, you're going to hire Hubie Brown? This is insane. I never wrote that, but that's what I thought.
Yeah, right.
And he came in and like it was, and I love hearing Hubie on television, and it feels like, he ended up winning Coach of the Year. He was great. That team, he got a team that had Pau Gasol as their best player, but then their next best player was James Posey, Shane Battier, who was not anything like he was, he was good, decent NBA player, but they had no second star, much less third star.
So why was Hubie the right guy? Why was he great for that team?
Because, well, he did a 10-man rotation, 2 5-man units. Like he treated it like it was college, basically. And he had 2 5-man units. He had Jason Williams and Shane and Pau and Posey, and they busted their ass. Pau, who just went into the Hall of Fame, is just an incredibly, wonderfully skilled player. But he somehow squeezed the most out of him.
Okay.
I mean, it was incredible. And then you couldn't miss the post-game pressers because he just hold forth. Like it was Hubie on round ball. It was absolutely must-see TV.
Well, give us an example of a moment you remember from Hubie.
I don't remember anything in particular. I wish I did. Anything in particular. He said, what I remember is this, though. No one thanks reporters, right? Like no one. Why? And we don't do it for thanks. But in the end, when it was over, Hubie approached me in the hallway and said, I just want to thank you for covering me the way you have for the last 2 years. He said, I'm a teacher. And for me to have been back and teaching again for these 2 years has been one of the great gifts of my life. And I want to thank you for, everything you've written about me during this period. Because I don't know, I don't want to say we were fawning over him, but we realized after a while that what was happening here was special and how much it meant to him. In the end, if you are put on this earth and you just know that there's some people are meant to be doing a certain thing, right? And for Hubie, he is meant to be teaching basketball. And for him to have a chance to do it, what struck me is taken away from him for 10 years. And to have that again, to be given the gift and the opportunity to do it again, and his gratitude at that, how much he reveled in the second chance, and how much he was ultimately grateful for the second chance.
What did you learn as a journalist from being around Hubie?
Oh, I mean, I'll say this. One thing you do learn is I've never been an X and O guy. Like, that's never been I'm never going to challenge a coach particularly on X and O's. That's not what I write about generally. Hubie, the way he would, and maybe it's more natural now because you can, but the way he would break things down for you and the way he showed you what I don't know. Like, it was an education, and that's the way it was. It was these were 5 things that were happening out there, and wow, I tell you this, and off he'd go. But it wasn't, he was easy to cover. The truth of the matter is he was easy to cover. Now, at the end, he wasn't easy to cover because the organization wasn't, because there became incredibly bitter feelings between Hubie and Jerry, and Hubie's son. Like, in the end, Hubie's son worked for the organization, and some of the players hated Hubie's son, and it became deeply complicated, like so many of these things do. But it wasn't hard to cover Hubie when it was in his glory days here.
So even when it got messy, he still sought you out and said thank you. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, and when I see him now, he's just incredibly gracious, great. Yes, everyone remembers here what that moment was like, as fleeting as it was. It's funny how your outside impressions of someone, and maybe this is the lesson, the impressions that you have of someone, this is true of Zach Randolph, this is true of Hubie Brown, and it's true of Jerry West. You know what everyone says. And then you interact with them, and if you're fair, and if you're open-hearted and observant, then you learn something else. Jerry West came in here as everyone thought he was, the logo, the dignified, regal representative of the NBA practically. And Jerry came in here, and this is all being captured right now in the Winning Time series, incredibly profane, mercurial. Like Jerry, after they traded Jason Williams at the end of a season. And Jason and I had a blow up in the locker room after the last game.
Yeah, I remember that. You ain't going to write it nothing, homeboy.
He said, you ain't writing nothing.
That's what he said to you, right?
Yeah, and he took my pen. He said, you ain't getting no interview. And he took my pen. So I criticized the trade. I said, really? You're getting Eddie Jones? Like, this is like why do we need old Eddie Jones? I criticized. Jerry called me, left me a voicemail message. He said, Geoff, Jerry West. He's always very, very dignified at the beginning. He said, Geoff, Jerry West, I read your column this morning, you fucking asshole. I just want you to know, I'm going to wish Jason Williams had beaten the shit out of you in the locker room. And just on and on and on. F-bomb, F-bomb, F-bomb. And then he'd say, wow, see you again soon. Goodbye. Like it was, the message was he wished Jason Williams had beaten the hell out of him.
So how did you respond to this?
Well, by that point, we knew that was Jerry. Like, it's just Jerry. And that's why right now, people are, like, when Jerry objected to the Winning Time profile, and I haven't actually seen Winning Time, but what I read is that he comes across as a lunatic. That is what he came across as in Memphis. Like, he's a very smart guy. He did draft Kobe Bryant. He did lots of things, and I don't doubt any of that. But emotionally, his struggles that he has with his temper, with his depression, with lashing out, we saw that all the time. That was Jerry West. I mean, that's what, and I think anyone probably who's been around Jerry West at any point in a working environment now knows that. Certainly people in Memphis did. And we're stunned. We're like, we thought Hubie was going to be difficult. He was a dream. We thought Jerry was going to be a dream. And man, was that a roller coaster.
I still want to know, how did you respond to a voicemail like that? What did you call him?
I wish I had the voicemail. I probably called him back. I probably did nothing. I just said, well, Jerry's venting. And that was not the first time Jerry went off. Like, Jerry would go off all the time. Like, that's what he did. The good news is he would tell you what he was thinking. Like, Jerry couldn't stand Shane Battier as a player. And he didn't like the fact that the city loved Shane Battier so much. And so he'd ripped Shane Battier to you off the record. And he just, like, Jerry was he didn't hide anything. And so I don't even think I was a little stunned by that message, just because who says, I wish Jason Williams had beaten the hell out of you? But I don't even think I called him back to say, I just think I thought he was blowing off steam. And the other issue is, this is the column that I wrote that inspired Jason Williams to go off on me was a bad column and unfair. And so
In what ways? Why? What was bad about it? Why were you unfair?
He just said some stupid thing like, at the end, even if we lose, I'll still have my family to go home and love my family. And I ripped him for it. And that's stupid. Like he was just saying that I was saying at the end, like it was I sort of said then, why are people buying tickets? It's fine if you lose, whatever. It was a stupid column. And I kind of went in on him for saying just the stupid thing that someone says, the cliche thing. And so I never, he got fined $25,000 for that outburst, stealing my pen, all of that. A couple of years later, after he won a championship in Miami, he came back to the Grizzlies as a free agent just for the end of the year. And there was what's it going to be like between Jason Williams and Calkins when he gets here?
Cage match.
And so I show up for the availability, and I show up with 20 pens in my pocket, in my shirt pocket. And he laughed, and that was that. But I guess, so back to the question is in the end, you learn that what the world thinks of someone isn't necessarily accurate about what they really are.
Okay, another basketball figure you butted heads with is John Calipari. University of Memphis for 9 seasons from 2000 to 2009. We mentioned the 2008 NCAA championship game loss to Kansas. That was part of 3 straight Elite Eights. He's a Hall of Fame coach, super successful. How would you describe your relationship with Calipari during his tenure?
John needed an enemy, and I became his enemy. But the truth of the matter is, when I got to Memphis, I would write tough columns. But then I quickly realized it's a different kind of town. It doesn't need people kicking, you don't need a ripping column every day. It's just not that kind of place. And so I lobbied for them. I wrote columns saying you got to go hire John Calipari. At the end of the first year of covering John, I knew John was unhappy about the coverage. And so I literally took every column I'd written, because he'd say, well, I don't read them, but people tell me. So I literally said, John, let's sit down at the end of the year. And I brought every column I'd written. I said, what do you object to here? And he just kind of waved me off. He's like, I don't need to look at them. I don't know, whatever. I literally, and this is the day we had to cut out columns. I brought him every column that I'd written. And I said, what? You rip me all the time. What exactly is the gripe? And he didn't want to engage on that level. He just didn't. John needed enemies, and he called them the miserables. He'd call someone the miserables. He's great it's almost a Trump gift of the way that he would use his enemies and label his enemies. Mm-hmm. So I was like the head miserable. But I didn't, here's the only thing I'd write about John. I never, if they lost a basketball game they shouldn't lose, I wouldn't rip him for his strategy. That's just not, that's not sort of who I was. But he would do things like players would be suspended for one reason or another. They got in a fight, or they were, whatever it is, caught with weed at the time mattered, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And then he'd say, I'm not going to suspend them for the first game of the season. I'm going to suspend them for the first conference game of the season because that matters more to them. It's going to really hit them where they hurt. And that was just ridiculous. The first game was against Georgetown or something, and then the conference game was against Tulane, which sucked. So I'd write a column saying this is ridiculous. This isn't taking punishment seriously. I would absolutely criticize his very flexible punishments. There was a player he had who was convicted, who was charged with domestic violence. And I wrote columns saying, you can't possibly play this player. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing? And those kinds of columns I would write about his very flexible discipline. But that's really all. Beyond that, they were awesome. It was they went to, they went to 3 straight Elite Eights. Was that it? They went to a Final Four. They were Memphis basketball will never be better than it was under John Calipari. But John really needs to fuel himself with enemies. And so I think he picked me out as the enemy.
Did you guys ever get along?
No.
Did you ever have a stretch where you could maybe have a conversation?
We could have conversations, but not civil ones. Here's the thing, though. For all of that, all of John's practices were open to everybody, including me. And John would have a Selection Sunday party at his house that I'd go to, and I'd cover him there. He had something up for the rebounders, the booster club before the season began with all the players available to talk, and I'd go there. Like he absolutely hated me, but he never like tried to hold it against me in terms of covering the team. And he never stopped talking to me. Never didn't answer questions. He would never say my name, like it was that kind of pettiness. Well, some guys don't know basketball, and he'd be clearly looking at me and whatever. But he would never. He never cut me off. He never tried to punish me in any way. In that way, the one thing I always did wonder. He had a guy named Smitty who was sort of his right-hand man, and Smitty came over one day when John first started not liking me, and said, "Hey, Cal and I have a bet. What bar exam did you pass? Was it the Mass bar or the D.C. bar?" And I looked, and I was kind of confused, and I said, "I passed the New York bar because I'm from Buffalo, and you can waive into D.C. if you pass the New York bar." And so I said that, and then it occurred to me, what kind of stupid bet is that? What bar did Geoff? Is that really a bar? Like if you're sitting around the bar saying, "Hey, Calkins, did he?" No, they were trying to prove that the reason that I didn't make it as a lawyer or remain a lawyer was that I hadn't passed the bar.
Wow, it really got personal.
A little bit. Like that was the one, but in terms of coverage, it never did. Like in terms of coverage, I was never cut off. That team was an absolute dream to cover. You could be in practice every day. It was unbelievable. And an incredibly colorful group, and we were in the locker room, whatever. John was great, and he was a great promoter of the team. John is an unbelievably good builder of basketball programs.
Since he moved to Kentucky in 2009, where he still remains and has had great success, won a national championship, have you ever had a conversation with him? Do you have any kind of relationship with him now?
No, I have no relationship with John. He came back. There was a regional here, and I asked him a question. I don't even remember what it was. And it was the same sort of frosty, but he answered it. It was the same sort of frosty response. And the truth of the matter is that it's irrelevant. John has obviously, and he's in the Hall of Fame. He's great at what he does. But no, we have absolutely no relationship. If I saw Hubie, he'd warmly come over and ask me how I'm doing. If I saw John, he would not even acknowledge my existence, which is fine.
Good. Like we always said, you weren't looking for friends. You were looking for some access and story. And
tremendous. I'd trade that every time.
So there you go.
Here's the other thing. Great copy. Like he was great copy, great stories, great copy. I wrote towards the end, I wrote a column about just John's verbal style and what a verbal genius he is. And I, called professors of rhetoric and whatnot and ran things. The truth of the matter is I was celebrating John right till the end because there was honestly no reason not to celebrate John and what he had accomplished at the University of Memphis. It is, and I suspect always will be the golden age of University of Memphis basketball.
Well, there was never a dull moment with Calipari.
No.
That's for certain. And there was never really a night quite like the night in Memphis of June 8th, 2002. You mentioned this earlier, and I want to follow up with it. The World Championship fight between Mike Tyson and the champ, Lennox Lewis, was held at the Old Pyramid down in Memphis. Usually fights are in Vegas or, New York or some overseas place. It ends up in Memphis, and you're the columnist in town. Boxing writers always say there's nothing quite like a championship fight, the night of a fight. You won an award recently for your 20-year look back on that night. What do you remember about the night and the atmosphere inside that building when Tyson and Lewis squared off?
What's interesting is that even more than the night, to me, was the lead up, the week. I'll get to the night here in a moment, but it was the idea that this was happening in Memphis was insane. And it was only because Nashville turned it down. because Nashville thought it was too pristine a place for such a guy who would bite someone's ear and whatnot. And so the promoter, Brian Young, who was just a really small town promoter at the time, he said, well, fine, I'll take it to Memphis. The mayor of Memphis, Willie Harrington, was a former Golden Gloves boxer. And so all of a sudden, no one wants this fight. Memphis will take it. And like I ended up going to Maui, to Tyson's training camp. I went to the Catskills. It's funny. Lennox Lewis had his training camp in the Catskills, and I stayed at this old, like Dirty Dancing type hotel there in the Catskills. I remember the only room they could get, it was a heart-shaped bed with a mirror on the ceiling, just me and my little heart-shaped bed. But so then the week up to it, you have...
Wait a minute, did you get any points for staying there?
The week up to it, you've got this contrast of Lennox Lewis, who comes in and is playing chess with the local kids in the local chess clubs and whatever else. And Lewis and Tyson, Tyson gets off the plane. He's got a face tattoo. I don't know if it was for that fight or the next fight he had the face tattoo. He's got his pigeons with him. At the time, he's being protested because he had said something that was homophobic. So I remember there was one day out at the gym, he was being protested by a local gay rights group, and he comes out of the gym where he'd been practicing, and he walks right over to, I think a guy was with Jim Maynard, I think his name was, and he hugs him. And we didn't know if he was going to bite his ear. Like, what's going to happen here? Tyson is, it's just it's the fight, the magic of the fight is something, but then the everything that comes with that Tyson, like what is going to happen next? At the weigh-in, he was overweight, and his trainer said, he said, "Don't worry, one poop and that'll be gone," or something like that. He was 5 pounds overweight. I'm like, what kind of a trip to the men's room is this going to be for him? But anyway, so it was just wild leading up to it, and then the whole world's media is in town in Memphis, which is a lot of fun. And then you go to the fight, and there's Denzel. I talked to Lee Steinberg was there, the agent. And I know Lee a little bit just from over the years covering players that he's represented and stuff. And I walk up to Lee Steinberg. I say hello, whatever. And he says, "Hey, Geoff, this is and I didn't quite hear him. I didn't hear this is so-and-so and this is so-and-so. And I just kind of nod over there. And then I realize it was Tobey Maguire and Leonardo DiCaprio. Those were the two people who he was introducing me to, who were both wearing baseball caps.
Did you ask him to write a sidebar?
Trying not to, yeah, right. So the fight wasn't much. The truth of the matter is, the fight wasn't much of a fight.
Yeah, I think Lewis won in the 8th round knockout.
He dominated him from the start, and he could have knocked him out earlier. It was really the fight, that whole era of Tyson as the baddest man on the planet, like indestructible. What can he do things that no other fighter can do. It really ended that night in Memphis, and then the subsequent fights were just sort of a sideshow.
Yeah, his career was pretty much over a year later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those are the kind of events, the kind of nights that, again, when you look back on, all those years of covering sports, and like you were mentioning earlier, just getting to travel. I mean, like you said, 8 Olympics, Masters, Super Bowls. When you think about all the things outside of Memphis that you went to, anything in particular stick out about your experiences?
I mean, there's definitely moments when you are, it's pinch me, right? Like, hell, Prince's press conference before the Super Bowl, where they planted someone who, like, Prince's performance at that Super Bowl is, by acclaim, the greatest.
Purple Rain, In the Rain.
In the Rain, like, it was insane. I was way up in the stadium, so I don't know that I even appreciated that as much as people who were watching on TV appreciated that halftime show. But they have a halftime press conference the day before or 2 days before, and they planted someone to ask a question, and then he did a performance. It turned into a Prince concert in the press conference, and it was 300 people on a private press conference. He had his twins up there dancing, and it was like, that was nuts. And that's sort of a pinchy moment. The other ones that I remember are, seeing Kathy Freeman win a gold medal as an Aboriginal woman in Australia, like that's unbelievably great. See Usain Bolt, Usain Bolt do what he does at Olympics is incredibly great. But there's also stories along the way that I don't think anyone else particularly remembers, but that I remember. Like at my first Olympics, there was a jumper from Japan named Happy Harada.
What a name.
And the Japanese ski jumping team, that was the pride of, that was who was supposed to win all their medals, right? And the team competition had come along and they did nothing. They were a national disgrace because they hadn't won. And it came down to Happy Harada's last jump. And he was the pride and joy of Japan.
We talk about pressure.
He was the last hope, right? And it is funny. You get on I don't know nothing about ski jumping. Nothing. I know nothing about ski jumping.
I know it's insane. I know that.
It's part of the pleasure of it, right? But you get on a bus, and I remember I sat next to Dave Barry going up on the bus to cover this event, and it comes down to the last jump. And what happens is there's a little green light that goes off. It's okay, now it's time to go, and you see them jump, and then they land, and then immediately you see the scoreboard flash up. You see the digital results right there within 3 seconds or 2 seconds. Well, Happy Harada lands, and there's no result. There's no result. There's no result. There's no result. And it turns out that he had outjumped the measuring equipment, so they had to get out there and manually measure the rest of it.
Oh, come on.
And so like
with a tape, tape measure.
And I don't know how to, and there's the gold medal. Like, that's fantastic.
Now he's very happy.
And so now he's the happiest Harada. Right. I'll tell you the event that I think was as emotional as I've ever covered is the first gold medal game between the U.S. and the Canadian women's hockey teams. They had played each other, like no other women really play hockey at that point, right? It was the U.S. and the Canadian women had probably played each other 50 times leading up to this gold medal game, and they'd probably split 25 times each. Like, they were the two powers. There had never been Olympic hockey before. They were finally getting a chance. The women are incredibly smart, thoughtful. They're not, the goalie for the U.S. team went to Dartmouth and was a cellist, and when it's over, it's over. And, they're going to go on their careers. There was no women's hockey league. And that game, the U.S. won the gold medal. And honestly, as emotional as anything I've ever covered, and the women are incredibly eloquent, and it's, that was spectacular. Yeah, it was just so much fun. The incredibly long days. I mean, the exhausting the Olympics were. I went once at the Olympics. You do the offbeat stuff. So I went, and Dave Hyde and I went down in Beijing to the market. There's a market where they have all the exotic food, right? And there's the centipedes, and there's the
monkey brains,
earthworms, and the monkey brains, and there's all this stuff. And we're each thinking what we're going to eat and what we're going to write about for the column. And I settle on that I'm going to eat the sheep penis and write about sheep penis.
Oh, come on.
And I did. That's what I had. Wait a minute,
you did?
I did, yeah. I ate the sheep penis. Hyde was like, my readers can't handle sheep penis. I'm going to have the dog. And so that's what he did. We whatever. We wrote.
Wait a minute. He actually did eat dog?
We wrote versions of the same column. But I, in the end, said I settled on the sheep penis. Hyde got crushed because his readers could not believe that he had the temerity and the heartlessness to eat dog.
Yeah, I mean, he had Fido and fries, and I don't think people were going to be happy with that.
Exactly. How much is that doggy in the window?
Oh,
exactly.
God.
It's a total disaster of a column for him.
Well, I was wondering when you left, the world of being an attorney, if, you just needed a hot dog that bad that you wanted to go be a sports writer. And now I find out you ate a sheep penis.
Yeah, sheep penis.
And Dave Hyde ate dog, which I'm going to have to ask him about.
That's exactly right.
This is the first time we've had this conversation on this show, so...
Yeah. Well,
if anything, it shows you what kind of life it was as a sports writer. All those years, all those travels, all those moments, deadlines, craziness, happy people, upset people. When you think about it, though, what a life.
No.
I mean, we were so fortunate.
The thing is, the part that I have liked really the most is being embedded in the community. and writing and trying to help, trying to entertain or whatever.
I know the folks in Memphis are lucky to have you now writing general columns as well as hosting your sports radio show. And I thank you so much, Geoff, for sharing the memories here.
I've admired this project from afar, and it's nice to be included. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Take care. Thanks for listening to Pressbox Access. We have new episodes every other Wednesday. Subscribe and review us. 5 stars, and I might buy you a beer. And check out the Pressbox Access channel on YouTube. You'll see a wide variety of clips from interviews, such as Dave Kindred comparing Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus, or Peter King recalling his early days of covering Bill Parcells and Lawrence Taylor. You can also listen to entire episodes on that YouTube channel. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button. Hey, it's free. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And please spread the word to friends, family, and anyone who is interested in sports, journalism, and history. All are welcomed. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Whether you are a brand new runner or you've been running for years, there is always a new way that running can change your life, and this is what the Planted Runner is all about. Being planted also means you're ready for growth. You can start exactly where you are right now and get better. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and I've coached hundreds of runners of all ages and abilities with science-backed training, nutrition, and mental strength techniques. And on the Planted Runner podcast, I'll share it all with you. You can be a better runner at any age. I'll show you how.